So I was born in El Salvador back in 19. I can't tell you. Can't. Yeah. Yeah. I was born in El Salvador and I came to the United States in 1982. My mom and my sister and my father was killed in the war in El Salvador, and my mom came here as an immigrant running away from the war. We were also immigrants, so when we came here to the United States, we had nothing. I mean, literally nothing. And we were very poor. My mom lived and worked at a house taking care of an older couple. She was a housekeeper, and also she was an assistant, a nursing assistant to this doctor and she lived there um, basically 6 days a week. And we hardly saw our mom, and we lived with total strangers for a very long time until my mom was able to, when she was able to basically find a new job and take care of us, and we were able to move in with her. But even then, after we started living with her, it was still hard. I remember seeing her at night at times just crying, trying to figure out how she was going to feed us. And there was times that I know that she would rather feed us and she wouldn't eat. And she would fall asleep with migraines because she wasn't eating. I'm sure there was times that she wouldn't eat for days just so that we could eat, and sometimes it would be tortillas and salt. And it was really hard for her, and I can see it. Even though I was young, I knew that my mom was going through a real hard time. When I was 9 years old, I remember, and it was one of um, one of the biggest memories of my life because it was when my life changed completely. It was Christmas Day. Instead of being home celebrating, um, around the table, eating lots of food and celebrating with lots of family members, we were actually at a party and we were catering to a family. We were starving. We had nothing again. And we were wondering when we would get home if there was anything to eat, if we had anything available in the fridge, and was if my mom had any money available to buy, something for us to grab. And as everyone was celebrating around the table, we were waiting on them, and I would just stare at their food, and my stomach would hurt, and I would just stare at them from far away. And I remember my sister and I would just just grab onto each other and just, think we would have the same thoughts that we wish we had a different life. Um, well, at Christmas, as we were going home that day, I know my mom was having a hard time, and we went. It was right. It was like the most amazing thing that my sister and my mom would have ever experienced in our life. We only knew pain, just suffering. We suffered so much, for such a long time. And that day, someone blessed us. To this day, I don't know who it was, who did that, but they changed my life forever. Because of that one person, I knew there was a God. Because of that one person, I knew that God was real. This person blessed us with presents. This person left 2 big bags. One was filled with lots of food, and the other big bag was filled with lots of presents. I remember that was the best Christmas I ever experienced, ever in my whole childhood. And I would never ever want any child to ever suffer the things that I suffered as a kid. I remember looking at the sky that night, and I asked God, I know you're real. I know you're up there. And I told him, one day when I grow up, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to be able to bless people. I want to do exactly what these people did for us, I'm going to do for others. I promise you. So on that day, I made that promise. So I didn't intend to break it. So in 2004, I remember I was already an adult, and I already was married, and I had 2 little children of my own. I was at a Joyce Myers conference, and I was sitting way in the back. And I remember asking God, looking to, I was trying to find what was the meaning of my life. Like, what did God want from me? I knew He wanted something from me, but I just didn't know what. And that was the topic of her conference. And it was finding yourself in God. Like, what does God want from you? And I remember just sitting there, and she said, there's someone in the crowd this evening. This person, she promised something to God long time ago. And tonight, I want to tell you that promise you made to God long time ago, today, you need to release it. You need to make it happen. There's no excuse. You need to unleash it. And that, I remember it was in November. In November of 2004 was the first year spreading the love of Jesus. That's when Spreading the Love of Jesus ministry started.
We've been struggling for a very long time, and so I had been in the middle of a lot of trouble and problems, and our marriage was suffering. And in September of 2004, some of you guys know our story, I was radically transformed and changed, and life was different for us. God had touched me, and He had saved me. So that same year, a few months later, 2004 in November, it was Thanksgiving season. And so we had very little in the bank. We had no money in the bank, $17, I believe. And so we were worried about Thanksgiving, and typically we always did it at our home because our home was a little spacious. So we were going to have the whole family over. And so we have a pretty big family, so we all kind of decided who's going to take care of what part of the dinner. And so by the time it was all said and done, there was a whole lot of dinner and a whole lot of food that we consumed, but also there was a lot of food that we didn't. So on the next day, there was a large amount of leftovers, and Rosie gets up real early and she says, we're going to go out to the streets and give out this food. And I thought, this is a day of rest. This is not what we're supposed to be doing. So she said, okay, just go to Smart & Final and buy some food trays. So I went to Smart & Final and I bought some food trays, and we started packaging up all the food. And so after we were kind of wrapped up, we had a box of about 20 or 30 food packages of rice and salad and some turkey and some ham. So we then hit the streets. We got our food, we got some water, and so we went to San Francisco, under the overpasses, over by Army and Bayshore, and we all just, Rosie, Georgie, Josie, and myself, we all just kind of parked there in front of La Raza Park, and there was a lot of homeless people there, and then we just popped our trunk open, and they started just swarming and coming towards the car. And so we started handing out food, and we started talking to them and praying with them. And on that day was our first Spreading the Love of Jesus ministry outing. And on that day, there was a few people that gave their life to the Lord, and that was our first ministry outing in 2004. That was our first outing in 2004 in November for Thanksgiving. on December, we figured, we have to do the same thing. We have to go out and try to help people and give them some food. And so we did. And from that point on, from about 2004 to about 2012, we were basically a seasonal ministry that would go out during major holidays and kind of bless the public or the homeless community. And so for a very long time, that's what we were. We were a very seasonal ministry, and we'd go out and help out in certain holidays. So in 2012, unfortunately, sickness struck our family. My wife was diagnosed with a rare nerve disease, and so she had to be home, and she was going through a very hard time because her life was completely changed, and she couldn't go back to normal. She couldn't do the things that she wanted to do. She had to spend a lot of time in bed recovering and dealing with the sickness, and it was a very hard time for her.
In September of 2012, when you suffer from a chronic illness, you also have, chronic depression. And I remember I was stricken by depression because of this chronic illness. And I remember going through so much in my mind, thinking, I am not worth it. I'm a burden. I can't do this, God. How can this happen to me? Out of all people, why me? Why me? And I said, how can I serve you, God? If you had plans for me, if you had plans for me to serve you, to help the poor, to help those in need, and how can I serve if I can't even use my arms or my feet? But even in those times, God proved me wrong. He showed me that even when a person that can't even sometimes speak, God can still minister through you. And I remember hearing that many times through friends who would just sit and pray next to me when I would receive treatments, or during my recovery times, I would have people come and just sit and say, Rosie, you are ministering even when you're in bed. And I started seeing that even during the times that I was really ill, God was still ministering. And all glory and honor to God, because I know that it was all Him doing His work through me. And so even when I was going through all this, I started asking God, okay, so all this is happening to me now. What is your purpose and what is your plan? And I remember being in this very dark moment when, again, the pain came really bad, and the doctor gave me real bad news. And he sat George and I down, and he didn't really give us any, hope. And so that's when I felt like, again, I was starting to feel positive, but when we sat down with him, I felt hopeless. So again, I was alone, and I started thinking, again, I'm not worth it. How can I serve you, God? How can I do this? How can all this stuff that you have planned for me, how can I help others if I can't even help myself? And God just came, and I felt Him just speak into my life and say, you're going to help others, and through helping others is going to be your healing grace. And I felt His presence so strong, and I felt like through this, through ministering, through feeding those who have less, through being able to help others, it was going to keep myself off my mind. And it did. For the first time that year, after being in bed, after being so sick for such a long time, I started seeing that getting up and just going around and starting just having women who are hurting at our house and praying with them, I started seeing that being helping others, it started getting my mind off of people. And the Lord just placed in my heart, now you have to do ministry all year round. And that's when spreading the love of Jesus began, not just during the holidays, but it started, from January until December.
It was an awesome time for me because I knew that she was struggling with her illness, but also I would come home and she would have pretty much daily testimonies about these people came over and those people came over, and we all sat around and we spoke about the Lord and all His goodness, and we got a chance to talk about their life, and I shared my life, and our life impacted them, and now they're heading a different direction, and it was just this beautiful time of testimonies like I've never seen before, where people were constantly coming over the house, and they were coming to be with Rosie and be with her and all these various friends and family. And then they would leave overwhelmed by what God was doing through her, because He was using her and He was using her pain to be able to channel His goodness to them. And like I said, it was a beautiful thing because there were so many testimonies and so many good things that happened in a time where it should have been a gloom and doom and depression and sadness. God was using all that to actually minister to a bunch of women who were in a lot of pain and going through hardships themselves, not so much physically, but emotionally or financially. And at that point, Rosie seen that the need was great. And so the Lord would give her visions and speak to her. And just all the time, she would always tell me what the Lord was showing her or telling her or using someone else to speak to her about. Okay, so during this period of a lot of testimonies and a lot of people constantly visiting the house here and speaking to Rosie and being ministered to by God through her, and there was a lot of dealings. There was a lot of communication going on between Rosie and God, and she would constantly tell me about dreams and visions and revelation and things that people were telling Rosie that was specifically, she felt, from God. So it was this awesome time of her hearing from the Lord and the Lord comforting her and the Lord letting her know that He is right beside her, that there's nothing that can separate Him from the love that He has for her. And so this all encouraged Rosie and kind of led her into taking this ministry to the next level. At that point, Rosie just felt like she needed to talk to me about stepping it up and doing more often, as opposed to a seasonal ministry. At that point, Rosie just felt clearly of the Lord that it was time to do it every other week, twice a month, and run with it. And so at first it seemed like a burden, but then after we started doing it, it was an absolute blessing. So we were doing it every other week, and on top of that, we were getting donations every other day. We were getting donations from the Rescue Mission. We were getting donations from Trader Joe's and Walgreens and the school districts around the Contra Costa County area. And so we were getting food 2 or 3 times a week, and we would just package it all up and take them to various families. So then we just started to kind of fall in love with just showing up into people's lives with food just by knocking at their door. We built all these super strong relationships on Tuesday nights and Thursday nights, just arriving at their house and bringing them food over and over, but not just bringing them food, bringing them, hope and friendship. And in the gospel, we would always talk about how, God wants to do something special in them. So it was just an opportunity for us to bless them and to share the good news with them and to build very powerful relationships with them. So that continued on, and then all of a sudden there was more and more people that heard about it, and they were just pretty upset at us because we wouldn't tell anyone about it. It was just kind of us doing it by ourselves, us kind of doing it on our own in our garage, and more people started to hear about it, and all of a sudden there was this big group of volunteers, and then everyone's kind of coming now on Tuesday nights or Thursday nights or Saturday mornings, and it just became this kind of household name there for a minute. And it was awesome because it was just it was on fire. The ministry was thriving, everyone was a part of it, and things were going real good, and we were feeding a lot of people out in the streets, and we were feeding families, and we're involved in the lives of these people. And it was a beautiful thing that took off out of what should have been detrimental to our family, to Rosie, to our ministry. But God actually shifted that whole thing around and made this ministry kind of explode from there, in a sense of notoriety and people knowing about who we are and what we do. So to God be the glory.
When we, every year for the holidays, we would have a lot of families on our list, and there was times that we didn't have enough money because at first, when you first began, it came out of our pocket, so we would run out of money to buy, to get a lot of food for all these families. So we would had to, place all the turkeys back and so I remember asking God, like, okay, so you want us to expand this. So what do we do? How do we get other people to help us? Because we want to bring you glory, but we don't want to tell people who we are, because then people are going to know that we're giving out food, and then it takes away from people seeing God's miracle. But the Lord just placed in my heart, you need to make it bigger and think bigger. So this is the time when I couldn't really think or write or do things on my own, and I started looking into spreading the love of Jesus into a nonprofit. And in 2013, Spreading the Love of Jesus became a nonprofit organization. So that was in itself a huge miracle.